We believe that the community is the true custodian of the environment, as they are the direct beneficiaries of everything good that the environment has to offer them, and suffer directly and immediately when the environment degrades. Hi, I'm Leena Dandekar and I'm founder of Raintree Foundation. Raintree started with the family wanting to give back, and we had a liquidity event when we exited our family business, and the children, who's Abha 29, Vivek who's 26, and I sat down and said, how do we use now what we have to give back to society and to nation building in a way. So Abha came with a very conservation led view. She wanted to work on forests, on conservation, on wild animal conflict, building corridors between natural forests and reserve forests, etc. Vivek came in with a larger view. He talked about climate change, he talked about carbon sequestration, global warming, clean technologies, and moving towards greener solutions for the planet. I realized that if we have to work on a model which brings prosperity to people, and if we are looking at working amongst the farmers and people who depend on the land, then it is extremely important to work on environmental aspects as well. And that gave birth to the Raintree model, which is based on the mantra of dignity for planet and people. So Raintree adopted a slightly differentiated model of development. It is a landscape model. A landscape model essentially takes a defined geographical area. What we do is look at the well-being and prosperity of that landscape. So it includes environmental prosperity, community prosperity, as well as individual prosperity. We work on all of these simultaneously. So what we will be doing in this pilot is doing about 47 to 49 years of work in a 7 to 8 year span, because what we would normally do separately, if we were to work on separate thematics, are running concurrently in a very holistic and integrated manner. We hope to work in a manner in which one day the community is custodian of their natural environment and both benefit in a balanced, holistic give and take. At the heart of everything that we do is, of course, climate action and environmental work. But we also integrate with that causes such as gender, inclusion for marginalization, disability. Sustainability is a very strong word for us as well. That's one more lens where we look at economic and environmental sustainability, but we also look to see whether local institutions like the Gram Panchayats, the self-help groups, etc., can continue what we started beyond our exit. And we're looking at long-term sustainability of our work as a lens during our design process as well. Raintree Foundation has been funded by the family so far, as it has been in a pilot phase. We did raise external funding last year for some specific projects that we were implementing, and that has worked out very well for us. I think India is still in its early stages of large philanthropic action on climate change and environmental work. But we have very strong, very committed organizations such as the AVPN, the India Climate Collaborative, and others steering the attention towards climate action and converting more and more people from traditional philanthropic practices to move towards climate funding as well.
I'm Abha Dandekar and I'm one of the co-founders and directors of Raintree Foundation. What I would say to the next gen or to other people my age and younger, we can see the effects of climate change in our everyday life. There's wildfires, floods, rainfall patterns are changing, there's droughts, and this is just our generation. When you think of future generations down the line, if this is the world that we live in, what kind of world are we leaving to the people who come after us? And I think for me that's a very sobering reality. It's not just one person. This doesn't just affect an individual, it affects everyone. And so we do really need to work on this collectively and make it a very urgent priority for all of us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all of you very beautiful and remarkable delegates. I know it's after a lunch sessions, everybody might be having a bit sleepy and stuff, but may I invite you guys to, go on front. I know there's, in the first row, there's a nice coach. It's not for VVIV, but it's for you. So please, if you are still in the back seat of the row, just come in front and fill up the room first. Thank you. So today, we are sitting in the One Asia stage, a LiveLib platform where we host inspiring sessions, celebrating new ideas and solutions, driving change across the Asia-Pacific regions. With focus on innovations, it's all about making a real impact and shaping the future. From groundbreaking tech to visionary strategies, this stage embodies progress and the drive to create a better world. Up next, we'll be talking about artificial intelligence. Earlier, you see that there's a video talking about how AVPN now leveraging AI. So we've recently building an AI, a dashboard, where leveraging an AI and text analytics to create interactive data about the mobilizations of financial and non-financial resources towards impact in Asia. This work is partnerships between our impact management unit at FVPN and Impact Intelligence, and we're proud to introduce this to you, which is already being in the impact marketplace that you can see in the left side of the planning halls. So building on this idea, today we'll be talking about the future of AI in the philanthropy. AI has been a potential to significantly change philanthropy with possible applications in many various areas such as day-to-day operations, donor and volunteer engagements, disaster response, and impact measurements. So today we'll be hearing from two outstanding leaders and experts in the impact sectors and have massive track records in philanthropic actions. So please join me to welcome Steve Law, the Executive Director of Singapore Management University, Lin Center for Social Innovations, and Mark Greer, the Managing Director, Giving an Impact from Charities Aid Foundations, up to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. This is billed as a fireside chat, so Steve and I will have a little chat, and hopefully that's going to be interesting for you. We're going to talk around AI, talk around some of our work, and hopefully get the whole conversation sort of grounded in the reality of the work that we're doing day to day. We might have an opportunity for questions later. If we do, then feel free to engage in that. If not, then we'll of course be around to talk later on. But Steve, why don't you kick off by talking to us a little bit about the Lien Center for Social Innovation and your particular work and interest in this area.
Thanks, Mark. Very good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming to this session, even after a fantastic lunch. We'll try not to put you to sleep. So the Lien Center for Social Innovation at Singapore Management University was set up in 2006 to essentially do good better from a point of view of data, evidence, and we're always looking for the cutting-edge innovation to be able to increase social impact. And of course, diving into AI and philanthropy is a key area of our studies now, not just at the center, but at the university. So if I may start just with a brief introduction of some of the things that we're thinking about at this stage of AI and philanthropy. Being the university, at the risk of sounding pedantic, we want to, in some ways, champion it, but we also want to give some caution as we move forward with AI and philanthropy. And let me explain that a little bit. So philanthropy, as you know, is literally meaning the love of humanity. And our great challenge, I think, going forward is how do you get AI to love humanity as well as you do it in philanthropy? That is to say, how does AI produce equitable, just, and inclusive outcomes? So there is some good news to it. I think the good news is AI can be the great enabler for charities. Often there's very strict budgets and limited resources. So AI, as with any other business as we understand it, can increase in efficiencies, provide you intelligence on fundraising, predictive response, disasters, or even human behaviors. The medical field, I understand, in AI has been tremendously advanced and advancing rapidly, so some very key findings there. And of course, evidence gathering for a more data approach to intervention. So certainly we are very happy for AI to be involved in philanthropic efforts within the ecosystem. Some caution though, the bad news if you like, and let me give you some examples. So when I said that AI has done great things in the medical field, one of which is melanoma, skin cancer. And I understand that it's just getting better and better at detecting. In fact, so much so that a medical professional, or maybe not, just somebody who knows how to use a camera, can take photos of your skin at certain angles, certain lighting, send it to AI, and I'm understanding that the accuracy of the predictions are in getting better and better. So, you know, in some ways, that's wonderful because then you're talking about many people who don't have access to specialists. So that's just one example of how AI has really gone forward in helping do good. But our caution would be, but keep a good eye on it. Because what was happening, if you know the story, one of the things that they discovered, and they only discovered this a few years later, was that AI was identifying melanoma in the patients every time there was a ruler in the photo. So because a doctor would say, okay, this looks like a cancerous cell, then they would put a ruler next to it. So AI looked at the ruler and said, okay, you've got skin cancer. So you can imagine how receiving that text, or receiving that message. That's just one very simple example of how we say there still needs to be a good eye on how things develop. Because AI, as you know, AI is built in some ways to predict the future, but based on the past. I'll say that again. So AI is built to predict the future, based on the past, historical. Now that's quite problematic for those who are people like you and me. We are dedicated to actually creating change, to be innovative. And for AI to answer the whole problem would be difficult because it looks in the past. And if the past is not a good past, then it's in some ways bound to repeat it. So again, we say, let's take a good look at AI, use it for what it's worth, but keep a good eye on it. So a few recommendations we are thinking about with AI and philanthropy. Number one, apply wisdom to it. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes wisdom is not simply just, lots of knowledge. Wisdom could also be the ability to aggregate data and information, which AI uses, so to speak, put it on the table. And the choice of the data that you put on the table is the wisdom that you will need because AI is going to use that data. It's like putting a nonprofit board together or putting a commercial board together. There's a plethora and perhaps a diversity of personalities, talent. You need to carefully curate that data. So that's some of the recommendations that we're looking at. We think governance needs to continue over AI, especially in the philanthropy sector because it is forward-thinking, it is innovative, it has to do with people. It loves humanity. Hopefully AI loves humanity too. There needs to be very clear transparency on perhaps the algorithms that are used, how the data is gathered and what it's based on. And as the university, we think, as an opinion, is to really involve with the computer scientists, the social scientists as well. Because the social scientists will be able to add a deeper human element to whatever issue that you're looking at, whether it's history, whether it's ethnography, whether it's anthropology, whether it's current social trends. So we do think that the future of AI and philanthropy has great potential, but we just need to keep in mind some of these things. And the last one I would say, and then I'll hand it over, is really, when we do use AI in philanthropy, I think it's always important to field test it. This is us putting our translative research hat on. Field test the results, field test the outcomes, and compare it with some kind of control group or even previous historical social impact that you make, and then make determinations from there. In other words, keep an eagle eye on AI as we continue to engage with it for philanthropy, for impact. And with that, actually, I understand, Mark, you've done some research as well on how charities are responding to the take-up of AI and how some manifestations of it might be on the field. So perhaps I'll hand that over to you.
Yeah, so we work primarily with donors and with charities as a donor-advised fund. So for those of you who that term isn't familiar, we effectively run alternatives to donors having their own foundation under our foundation's umbrella, and our donor clients invest funds with us and then ask us to distribute those funds out to charities around the world. And one of the particular things we specialize in is getting those funds across international borders, which, as many people will know, is increasingly difficult because of regulation both in individual countries but also global regulations around particularly financial crime and counter-terrorist financing, which was one of the interesting points that I thought came out in one of the sessions this morning. We are always doing research into the public's attitude around charities and the public's attitude around charitable giving. And so we thought that, so much attention is on AI at the moment. We thought, well, let's find out what people think about AI around the world in relation to charities. So we surveyed 6,000 people across 10 countries globally around their attitudes towards charities using AI. And what was really interesting was donors in particular do undoubtedly see that the opportunities and the benefits outweigh the risks. So the general attitude towards AI usage by charities is positive. But one of the particularly interesting trends that we saw was that the higher the value the donor is, so as you work through from small donations through to major donors, the larger donors were more positive about the opportunities for AI. All donors of all types were net positive, but there was a much clearer level of interest and answering that question, do the opportunities outweigh the risks? People were more inclined to say yes than the more that they gave. And so we thought that was really important for charities to understand. We also found that 77% of major donors would pay attention to what charities who they support had to say about AI. So really strong interest from major donors in particular about the charities that they believe in and that they're supporting and what they've got to say about AI. And also found that, again, 70% of all donors said that effort should be made to ensure that all charities are able to reap the benefits of AI, and charities of different sizes are able to do that. On the more negative, or not negative, but the concerns and the risks that people identified in the research, there was 7 key risks that people came back with in this survey, and you can read the full thing on our website. But to pick out the top 3, the top 3 risks that the public felt were about charities becoming disconnected from the cause, about potentially making biased decisions. I think a bit to your point, Steve, of the AI predicting the future but being based on the past, and of course risking a data breach as well was the 3 main concerns that the public had about charities using AI. There's lots more that we can talk about in the research later in the session, but Steve, what do you think about some of those numbers, but also in general, the donor perspective on charities using AI?
I think it's been mixed. Just before I answer that, one of the things that we've also discovered is, generally speaking, in Asia, the charities have not been very enthusiastic about adopting AI at this stage. I think it's early days, and and some of you might be AI experts here, you'll see that within the philanthropy arena and the charity arena, there's not too much happening within the AI scene, and for two reasons. Number one, it's a lack of expertise, and as you know, charities don't have the budgets to hire the greatest tech people or the greatest computer scientists, and so they struggle in the area. Number two, there hasn't been much data. I mean, in this conference, we often talk about data, evidence, social impact measurement, so on and so forth, but by and large, these are to my understanding, quite new in the arena, and therefore the background data, the foundational data, may not actually exist. Or if it does, from a social science point of view, it may not be rigorous enough for us to call it evidence or data. So the take-up has been rather slow. So like you said in the survey, we also have found that there is generally a positive response towards it, but much is unknown at this point for AI and philanthropy. I think going forward, I think we, as I mentioned earlier, that there must be a way for us to be able to increase our expertise in this area. And I do feel that the researchers, people like the university, have a part to play in educating the ecosystem, educating the sector on how best we can use it. We need to think of the potential for a charity, or if you think of a small charity or a growing social enterprise, it would be inefficient of them not to engage in AI. So I think going forward, that's something we need to push. Since we're in a philanthropy conference, and I've been working in the charity sector for a couple of decades, we love donors who say, yes, we will fund you for capacity building. And there are not many out there. Because when you say that, when we run charities, we understand the struggles on the ground, and sometimes we just need to get up to speed. And if someone would help us fund that, getting us up to speed, and in this case AI, we could run so much further. So I think that's my perspective on the future going forward. And as donors and philanthropists, that's something that we all should look at. And perhaps you, with so much experience with so many charities around the world, what is their response, and what are their thoughts towards it as well?
I mean, I think, not just in the charity sector, but in all sectors of the economy, there's clearly an arms race when it comes to AI at the moment. And the big technology companies pouring billions and billions of dollars into this. And I think what we find is the most common kind of theme within people's concerns about this is charities are always left behind with these sorts of technology changes and developments, because a lot of them don't have deep pockets, and often because funders are not necessarily willing, as you say, to fund the more strategic elements of a charity's development. And so obviously we get to talk to a lot of funders in our work, and we have a kind of a slightly unique position to be able to have conversations with donors that charities can't, because we're an intermediary rather than someone that's trying to pitch for the funding, as it were. And so we can have a slightly more forthright conversation with donors about the importance of funding these elements of a charity's work. And that's clearly part of our donor education work at the moment, is saying, look, there is a risk that charities do get left behind by these developments, and it's really important that we minimize that. I think it is encouraging, though, that again in that major donor segment, 3/4 of them saying this matters, and I think clearly they are the sorts of people that charities can have those kinds of conversations. I suppose let's, if we think a little bit about some of the opportunities that are there. We've talked about some of the risks and the concerns. we, again, in the survey, we did ask people what they felt about the opportunities that AI presents to charities. And interestingly, the top three things that came back were helping disaster response, which is something we often get involved with because many of our clients, both high net worth individuals but also corporates, want to respond to natural disasters around the world as they happen, but clearly doing that in a rapid way isn't always easy, and because there's all sorts of challenges both on the ground and in terms of moving funds across borders. But people felt that AI does present an opportunity to speed up the ability of charities to respond to disasters. They felt that AI would, the second point that came out was just help charities grow their impact. So that was phrased as helping more people, but really that's about charities doing more of what they do through AI. And then, of course, being more efficient with their own operations. Some of the usual use cases for AI that almost every organization is thinking about in terms of cutting out admin and making their processes more efficient, that kind of thing. But I mean, Steve, from your work, what would you say are the opportunities and the exciting things for charities to be looking at?
I think having run several charities myself, to be able to employ AI in a much more, instead of hiring another person, I know it sounds terrible, but for our charities, we're always trying to reduce our costs. And to be able to do, for example, secondary research on a needs assessment where I can't afford to hire a researcher or a consultancy like ours at the university. AI is that force multiplier for us to be able to still do some good evidence, data-driven work, as well as maximize the donor's dollar. The other one that we are very interested in looking at is measurement of social impact. While we gather the data, there's always that issue of processing it, cleaning the data, as we call it, and analyzing it into a useful form. We're very excited at the ability of AI to do that. I think impact measurement is not just the future, it is current and absolutely necessary if we are to have a strategic approach to philanthropy. I do feel like AI has a major role to play in that. I think it's early days yet. I think we still need to, as I said, keep a good watch on AI because we want it to have those just, equitable, inclusive outcomes. And I'll give you some examples, and it's well documented. So in 2015, when AI was really advancing, before they called it AI, Google had a word vector system, which essentially is an equation of how you produce data. So it was deeply biased based on historical data. So I'll give you an example. It would, if you say doctor plus female, you'll get the word nurse. Yeah, that was the bias of AI. It could not picture a female doctor for whatever reason, and that's shocking, right? Absolutely shocking. They hopped in and fixed that real fast. The other one was business owner plus woman equals housewife. Yeah, so we need to be careful. You need to keep a watch on it, and they did. In 2015, by the time 2016 came around, they had fixed that. But as we continue to go forward, again, AI fundamentally is going to take the past and the data of the past, accurate or not, and it's going to give you an outcome. So that's, therefore, as we move forward, as we be extremely optimistic, we do need to have that governance, transparency, and continual engagement, perhaps, with other fields, other expertise in there, like the social sciences.
I think that transparent and ethical use of AI by charities is absolutely critical, isn't it? Because, as you say, some of those examples, the trust in AI's ability to do whatever people are trying to use it for is very, very easily lost. And the trust is everything for charities. And I think one of the things we really want are the charities that we work with to understand is AI may well make you more efficient. It will undoubtedly be able to go into your CRM and to figure out connections you've got and to do all sorts of things that you couldn't do before. But when it comes particularly to major gifts, be that, again, from corporates or from wealthy individuals, at the end of the day, a donor is a person, and donors give because of the relationships that they have, and AI can't really help you with that. And so people with the thought that AI will kind of completely, in itself, revolutionize the whole way charities work with donors, I think it's a tool, but it's not something that's going to completely change the fundamentals that people give to people who run organizations who they trust, who they think are credible, and who are having the sort of impact that they want to be funding.
Yeah, that's a great point. So just to bring culture into the picture, so in Asia, you might find that the methodologies, or the approach, I should say, to philanthropy is highly relational, and something that AI just cannot duplicate and probably can't pick up in the nuances of. Now, at the university, we are looking at ways to include the cultural element, and which is why there's a partnership between the computer scientists and social scientists. And so a culturally nuanced AI, if you like. And I think that's one of the ways forward, to understand really the context of which that is taking place. I wonder if we want to open the floor to any questions. We have about 6 minutes. If there are any questions from the floor.
There should be a microphone to go around if anyone wants to raise their hand.
Feel free. And if you have something to add, please do. Yes, the lady in the 4th row.
Yeah.
Two mics. Thank you so much. This has been a really compelling conversation. I've learned a lot from you. So I'm Mireille Mather. I'm with the N Fund, and we're a collaborative fund that focuses on eliminating neglected tropical diseases. And I was curious about the comment made about the level of investor who have an affinity towards AI. And I was wondering if you had, was there a threshold on the level of investment that kind of demarcated those that were more inclined to want to explore AI than those maybe smaller donors and investors?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the key point there, though, is all levels of donor were said that the opportunities outweigh the risks. Major donors, though, were the strongest, and the line does go that way, right? So I can get the exact numbers out of the report, but we defined it as major donors, and our general definition of that would be those who have the capacity to be giving into 6 figures in US dollars or pounds sterling. There's a handful of questions. Should we take a couple of questions and then answer them, just in the interest of time?
Thank you for presenting wonderful topics and the futuristic. Regarding humanitarian response and emergency preparedness or preparedness for humanitarian response, how AI can help in designing future programs when a humanitarian situation emerge? Can AI be a very good tool for planning for this emergency response?
Yeah, and then there's the lady just 2 rows forwards as well.
Hi, thank you. Ayla Göksel from Turkey. I think we're all a little bit overwhelmed with the AI conversations, and then listening to you, I was struggling with trying to distinguish what the challenges that you were describing, how they were distinguished in the philanthropy sector as opposed to other parts of society. So what I'd really like to know, I run a large network of foundations in Turkey and work with lots of small NGOs as well. Leaving this room, what would be your advice to this large sector? What should we be doing tomorrow? Or what should we have done yesterday? I'm just finding it, what is it that I can sort of integrate into my work or into my understanding today? Because we all know the challenges that you've touched upon so eloquently, but it's left me a little bit less illuminated or depressive. I'm so sorry.
That's what academics do. It's our job.
Why don't I quickly take the first question and then Steve, the second one. So on the first question about disaster response, I'll slightly duck that question and point you to, there's a whole session on Thursday afternoon that my colleague Jesse Kraft, who's the Chief Executive of CAF America, will be speaking at alongside other colleagues who, and that's focused on disaster response, and I'm sure this will no doubt come up in that session. But I think in general, it was around, one of the main things that we know from disaster responses is that the more you learn from each disaster and you roll forward into the next in terms of how things are responded to, how to mobilize both money but also on-the-ground assets, the better the response comes to the next and the next. And I think probably that was at the heart of that response, is using AI to learn as much as we can from things that have happened in the past to help us with the preparedness for the next one.
And I'll take your question, and apologies for less illumination. I think that if what would you do tomorrow? What I would do tomorrow is invest into capacities in expertise, as simple as that. And ask if you manage funds, if you manage funders, if you manage charities, set a little bit aside for capacity building, because it will pay great dividend and also be able to protect you against some of the potential risks of AI.
We have 1 minute left, and so you have the mic. So last question to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Steve. I'm Nishant from the American India Foundation. One of the bigger challenges that we have faced in the sector is silos, right? Thematic silos, geographical silos. What role do you think AI can play in kind of bridging some of these silos that we face and kind of leveraging the benefits that a more kind of intersectionality-based approach can bring in?
It's a great question. Working in silos, how does AI help us? I can tell you this, in Singapore, the government pays charities money to collaborate. And I'm told that is one of the least tapped upon funds in all of the funds available to us. So how can AI help? I think, like I said just now, I think wisdom applied to AI is selecting very carefully the data at the table, or if you like, the people at the table. But what it can do, it can illuminate diverse opinions. And I think in that place, with a lot of humility, with some agility, we take what AI has given us and understand and appreciate and even celebrate that diversity of opinion and data that's gathered. So perhaps that would help some of the collaboration.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions, for your attention and for your interest in this topic. We're around at the conference, so do feel free to reach out and to continue the conversation. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their time here at AVPN in Abu Dhabi.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mark and Steve, for that insightful sessions. I know it will be a very great, talks after this, but I hope that everyone can sit around on the seats again, because next we will be having a sessions. Yeah, so thank you. This is very wonderful to see that everyone is talking and have a decent discussions. But I hope that people can sit around and back to your seat, because up next we'll be having a very inspiring sessions about what we call as Inspire 8, which is a series of showcase inspiring Asian social impact leaders who are innovating and shaping the futures by addressing today's most critical issues. We started this series last year in Kuala Lumpur and had really great feedbacks. Today's sections, we will hear from two inspiring leaders that have been outstanding in their work towards impact in Asia. The first one is an extraordinary leader who has once declined a JP Morgan Wall Street offer to work on real streets of India after his MBA from Yale. He decided to launch these voluntary movements after he discovered the immense sufferings experienced by his elderly 82-years-old nanny when she was abandoned and abused by her sons. So he gathered friends and began volunteering at homes for elderly, slums, and orphanage. So these sessions will be sharing, a very short story coming from our very inspiring leaders, and we'll share the story with you. So I hope you can stay and fill the room in front of you, and join me to welcome Amitabh Saab, the founder and Chief Inspirations Officer of Yuva Unstoppable.
युवा अनस्टॉपेबल जो एक एनजीओ है, आपने क्यों शुरू किया, क्या इंस्पिरेशन था?
युवा अनस्टॉपेबल स्टार्टेड एज अ वॉलंटियर मूवमेंट कि सभी लोग हफ्ते में 2 घंटा अपना समय दीजिए टू गो एंड टीच मैथ, साइंस, डांस, म्यूजिक, इंग्लिश इन गवर्नमेंट स्कूल क्लोज बाय. वृद्धाश्रम में जा सकते हैं, अनाथ आश्रम में जा सकते हैं. तो सिंपल आइडिया था, हफ्ते में 2 घंटा दीजिए. हजारों लाखों हमारे वॉलंटियर्स जाने लगे 40 शहरों में, और तब उन्होंने बताया कि क्या हम डिजिटल इंडिया के लिए कुछ कर सकते हैं, क्लीन इंडिया के लिए कुछ कर सकते हैं. सैनिटेशन की सुविधा इतनी अच्छी नहीं थी, और जब प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने इसके बारे में बात करना शुरू की तो सबको बहुत ज्यादा प्रेरणा मिली. एंड आई एम हैप्पी टू शेयर कि आज हमने अबाउट 5000 स्कूल्स में तकरीबन 7 मिलियन बेनिफिशियरीज को हेल्प कर रहे हैं विद इंप्रूव्ड टॉयलेट्स, डिश वॉशिंग, ड्रिंकिंग, हैंड वॉशिंग एरियाज, ताकि डायरिया कम हो, यूरिनरी ट्रैक्ट इन्फेक्शंस कम हो, अटेंडेंस बढ़े, सेहत बढ़े. स्मार्ट क्लासरूम्स लगाए ताकि जैसे हम गांधी जी लिवर किडनी का टेक्स्ट बुक में पढ़े थे, पूरा ऑडियो विजुअल हो गया. प्ले एरियाज किए हैं, सोलर पैनल्स लगाए हैं, वाटर चार्जिंग किया है, और जो बहुत ही डिजर्विंग स्टूडेंट्स हैं, गिफ्टेड स्टूडेंट्स हैं, उनको स्कॉलरशिप्स दी है ताकि दे कैन बिकम डॉक्टर्स, लॉयर्स, इंजीनियर्स, चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स. सो इट्स बीन अ ब्लेसिंग.
One thing I have to say about Amitabh is, in this world of giving, the biggest task is to find somebody who is a bridge, who you can trust. And the great thing between me and him and our friendship is we crossed that bridge a long, long while ago.
More power to you.
Thank you, friends. I think first of all, you guys have been sitting for so long with a big smile on your face. A round of applause for all of you. आप सबके लिए एक बार तालियां हो जाए. And I'm so glad that I was able to show that in Hindi with English subtitles to present India to all of you. So namaste from India. And I request all of you to please stand up for a quick second. If everyone can please get up. And a lot of people ask me, what does Yuva Unstoppable do? And the last 2 days I have been here, I feel AVPN does this beautifully as well. They do a wonderful job of spreading smiles all over the world. So I'm going to give you guys a live demonstration of how to spread smiles. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. In the next 30 seconds, I want you to give a hug to 3 people around you, and your time starts now. Go, 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 go. Awesome, you can sit. The guy in the back gave it to 3 hugs, to 3 girls, as expected. Thank you all. I think one more round of applause for all of you. Thank you for being here. In the ancient Indian wisdom, it used to be that one son is for business and second son is for the society. My older brother went to Harvard Business School and he started a very successful legal tech firm with about 1,000 lawyers working for him across all 7 continents. He does that. That's his thing. That makes him come alive. I went to Yale for my MBA, declined a Wall Street offer with JP Morgan, and decided to come back and work on the real streets of India. I thought you could be a doctor, a lawyer, a billionaire's son, a rickshawala's son, someone working at IBM, Google, Microsoft, whatnot. But everyone could give 2 hours a week of their time to go and teach maths, science, dance, music, English in a government school close by. Very quickly, I'm happy to share, we mobilized 150,000 volunteers all over the country. And these would come to me and say, it's great, we're teaching them maths and science, but for 300 girls, there's just 2 bathrooms. The dishwashing, drinking, hand washing area is just one faucet of water. A lot of these schools, they don't have a smart classroom or even a board. They paint the wall black and write on it with a chalk. There's no play areas. A lot of the schools, the electricity goes away. There's no solar, water harvesting, proper capacity building of the teachers. Can we do something about it? And I like to think of myself as one of the most blessed human beings on planet Earth. And I constantly remind myself of that. I mean, just look at the place where we are right now. And luckily, even at that stage in my life, there are about 100 companies, people like Bank of America, Disney, HDFC, KPMG, Ernst & Young, who were sending their employees for 2 hours a week to go and teach these subjects. All these guys, about 9-10 years ago, said, well, can we start doing CSR with you? Can you implement and transform the schools in an impactful and a measurable manner so that the sanitation improves, so that there's an increase in attendance, the diarrhea goes down, the urinary tract infections go down, measurable outcome in maths and science goes up. And they asked me, कि क्या आप खाली राजा का बेटा राजा बनेगा? Means will only the king's son become the king? In India, we want to create a culture where it's important that some places that happens, but in India, we are trying to ensure that children who are meritorious from difficult backgrounds become doctors, lawyers, engineers, chartered accountants. So we found kids who get more than 80% in their 10th and 12th and started giving them a scholarship. And I'm happy to share that 50 kids just this year from the slums, rag pickers' children, dhobis' children, rickshawala's children have made it to IITs, which is the Ivy Leagues of India, just this specific year. And tons of our kids are working in some of the largest multinationals, and they're making maybe 100,000 pounds a year, who were earlier, the parents were making maybe $3 a day. And they would come to us and say, sir, our parents are okay to live in a 12 by 12, because that's where they have stayed. But we would like to help 5 more girls with a scholarship so that they can become doctors, lawyers, and engineers, and we'll build a house later on. So I'm happy to share that London School of Economics did a third-party assessment of the 6,000 schools. We are in 6,000 schools now, working for 7 million kids in 25 states. And they found a 15% improvement in attendance and a 4 times improvement in learning outcomes in maths and science in the schools where UA intervenes in. And I'm happy to see so many of my wonderful partners here. And we have now mobilized, of course, with God's grace, about $100 million in charity. And a lot of people ask us, how big is your fundraising team? I'm happy to share that we don't have a single fundraiser. And I was joking with Ganeshji, but I really believe that we have friend raisers in UA. And I believe in the concept of being a friend raiser and raising friends and adding value in people's lives and what they want to do. I think if we add value in what other people want to do, it'll be easy to be friends and everything else will be taken care of. So it's been a pleasure and a joy for me to be here as a part of this incredible AVPN conference. Thank you, Lavanya, for inviting me all the way from India. The kind of friends I've made here, the kind of stories I've heard here, the kind of incredible journeys and transformations in the lives of beneficiaries that I've heard of here has been phenomenal. I think these are the sessions required to build a better world, and I'm glad that AVPN is doing this so beautifully. I would absolutely like to end on a slightly spiritual note, because might not have been done so much here, but that's such a huge part of my life that I feel I must share. A lot of people ask me in my interviews and podcasts and stuff that, so because you're helping so many people, must give you so much contentment and joy. You're helping almost 7 million children, that must give you so much pleasure. And I always tell them that I'm happy and I'm serving. I'm already happy and I've come to Abu Dhabi for a great conference. I'm already happy and I've made so many friends. I'm already happy and I'm going to go to the new Babs Mandir that has come about in Abu Dhabi right after this call. I'm already happy and I saw the incredibly stunning mosque here. So I truly believe that people in our sector, we need to have more smiles, more gratitude, more fun. Because I think if we take care of ourselves
and charge our emotional, spiritual, and physical batteries, we'll be able to give a lot more. A lot of times we feel that, especially in this sector, that work, targets, deadlines. I've seen people do 12, 13, 14 hours of work, then family, and then self. But I realized if we turn that around and focus on ourselves, be it meditation, prayer, maybe for an hour, whatever practice that you follow, and 1 hour of gym or physical exercise, I think if we water the garden inside for 2 hours, it's a lot easier to water the garden outside for 22 hours and perhaps be more efficient with our families and work. Again, I thank AVPN for having me here. And we've reached 6,000 schools across, all different nooks and corners of the country. And it is we are just getting started. Miles and miles and miles to go. Thank you all. Jai Hind. Jai Abu Dhabi. Thank you, AVPN.
Thank you, Amita. I think you should be the MC because we love your energy so much. So we'll be having a very short minute of coffee break, around 20 minutes. I would encourage you to grab a coffee outside the rooms, lighten up a bit, find your colleagues, and invite them to this room again at 4:10 because we'll be having another spectacular sessions at 4:15. So thank you and see you a bit. I'm sorry, guys, it's not coffee break yet because we'll be having a next sessions. It's the fireside chats between CEO of Bada Jafar. Sorry for that. We're just so excited to have a next sessions, and I assure that we will be having a coffee break after this, but promise that these sessions will make us stay awake because it's gonna be a very, very insightful sessions. So we'll be having an exclusive conversations with one of UAE's most prominent business leaders, Mr. Bada Jafar, as we will delve into his journey building a successful business while fostering positive social change. This fireside chat, moderated by Mina Al-Oraibi, Editor-in-Chief of The Nationals, will explore the intersections of business, social responsibility, and environmental sustainability. So, without any further ado, I would like to call and let's give a warm welcome and a round of applause to Mr. Bada Jafar, the CEO of Crescent Enterprise, and Mina Al-Oraibi, the Editor-in-Chief of The Nationals. Up to the stage.
Good afternoon. So here we are, finally seated. I'm delighted to be moderating this conversation with Badr Jafar, who really, it would be unfair to just give you the title of CEO Crescent Enterprises, which is hugely important, but also really an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and importantly, special envoy for business philanthropy, so putting those two worlds together. And as you saw his can-do attitude there, Badr kind of can do anything he puts his mind to, including getting the session started on time. So, Badr, this morning we heard from Her Excellency Minister Shama Al-Mazrou'i about what philanthropy means, and she focused really on the issue of service. So I wanted to ask you, as we talk about your thoughts on philanthropy, your journey, what the concept of philanthropy means to you.
So just as a quick disclaimer, we've heard from great experts and practitioners in philanthropy today. I'm not an expert in philanthropy. I'm a good student of philanthropy and someone who genuinely believes in the catalytic impact that philanthropy can have in partnership with business and government capital and networks. And that's something that's inspired me to be more active in this space over the past 20 years or so. And it's fantastic to see really the UAE becoming a hub of sorts for philanthropic activity, thought leadership, insights, networks, not just for the Middle East, but as we see now here for Asia, including in Africa as well. And I think to a large extent, you know, the so-called global south, the term which I know you're not that fond of. But for me, philanthropy, I often refer to it as the forgotten child of the capital system. It's often seen as a periphery player in many markets and regions around the world, and in some parts of the world even regarded with a high degree of suspicion, including in parts of the Middle East. And there are various socio-political reasons why that was the case. But that's also changing. The fact of the matter is philanthropy, just from a scale perspective and from a quantity perspective, is dispersed in the trillions of dollars a year. In the US alone, where we have better measurement of philanthropic output, anywhere between $500–600 billion a year. If you take just zakat and sadaqah, which of course Islamic alms giving between compulsory alms giving and discretionary alms giving, anywhere between 400 billion up to $1 trillion a year, they say. And so you add those together, plus the other pools of philanthropic capital, we could be talking about philanthropy dispersed in the order of around $2 trillion a year. Now that's significant, right? If you put that into perspective, even at the $1 trillion mark, that's 3 times more than the global combined humanitarian and development aid budgets in the world. If you put it, we just come out of COP28. If you put that in comparison with the total amount of aid or development aid that's gone from advanced economies to developing economies for climate mitigation and adaptation, that's 10 times more at the $1 trillion mark. So this is significant. But for me, the most exciting aspect of philanthropy, and more specifically strategic philanthropy, is that multiplier effect that you can generate, right? The fact, and it can do that because of unique qualities, I think, that philanthropic capital has over other pools of capital. The fact that it can be more nimble, more flexible, more risk tolerant, more equitable in its deployment, which is why when trying to address challenges, global challenges, partnering philanthropic capital, again with business and government capital, is exactly what we need to get to the scale of both capital but also ingenuity to address these big ticket global challenges, including the likes of climate and nature.
So you speak about networks, partnering, and that really requires having the infrastructure. And you've spoken quite a bit about the importance, you've written also, in the National included, about the importance of that philanthropic infrastructure, but also having those networks. So how do you develop them? What's needed to create the right ecosystem, the enabling environment that allows for strategic philanthropy?
Yeah, that's where, after a number of years sort of dabbling in the space, that's sort of where I focused my energies, which is helping to build philanthropic infrastructure. Because, and again, there's no one size fits all, right? So, but if you look at what what's required to generate and create that enabling environment for philanthropy to strive, and more specifically strategic philanthropy to strive. Obviously, the regulatory dimension is extremely important. Without that, you'll always have weak infrastructure. And that's why, of course, again, partnership with government is essential, and policymakers being on board with this, I think, inflection point that we're seeing in how philanthropy is embraced in many parts of the world. Networks is critical. So for me, again, if you just take a step back, looking at what infrastructure means, the age-old sort of adage of not giving fish but teaching to fish. For me, the infrastructure is the better tools to fish, the better rods, the better instruction manuals, if you will, helping to generate more bang for buck with the same resources. The reality is, of course, in many emerging markets, we're seeing those resources going up significantly, not least because we have a massive wealth transition that's taking place. Globally, $60 trillion over the next 2 decades we expect to see, and in Asia and Africa alone, close to $25 trillion over the next 2 decades that we expect to see passing on to the next generation. So we expect to see much deeper pools of philanthropic capital being dispersed. So we're at a time where if we don't have that philanthropic infrastructure in place, we're going to see a lot of muted impact. Right. And beyond muted impact, we also have, and there's increasing recognition, a responsibility to make sure we know where money is going, because money that is going into opaque structures can not just have muted impact, but actually unintentional negative impact. And that's becoming more of an urgency. So again, what are the key aspects of building infrastructure? Networks is key because we need to share learnings, build trust, not just within the sector, but between different stakeholders, as I said, again, between philanthropy, business, and government. And that's actually also where media comes in, really importantly. We still have a dearth of not just data and information, but stories, well captured and well investigated and well written stories, which can also be translated into case studies across many of these regions of the world. So having media on board as a partner in that quest is extremely important. But fundamentally, with the right infrastructure, we have better trust networks. And again, as we all know, trust is the foundation for everything. So that's really where I've been focusing my efforts, including helping to build these sorts of platforms at academic centers of excellence in different parts of the world. Cambridge being one of them, but then more recently the NYU in Abu Dhabi, hopefully one soon in a country in sub-Saharan Africa.
I was going to say, you're going to tell us some news.
In South Africa, in South Africa to serve the region and hopefully in partnership with the African Union, and then one in East Asia as well. And these would serve basically three, or stand on 3 pillars: research, convening, and education. And of course, these are not mutually exclusive. They would all inform and feed off each other. Yes.
And your point about media, about narrative story, it's that dissemination, but that also requires transparency. And your point about sometimes there's hesitancy, do you see that as one of the challenges to strategic philanthropy? I mean, this is one of the questions I was thinking about before our session, is that it sounds great, if there's the capital to be deployed, if there's the infrastructure there, what's holding back stronger philanthropy? So is that one of them?
Yeah, it's interesting, just to give you some context to my answer. 13, now almost 14 years ago, got together with a group of business people in the region here and created an entity, a non-profit called the Pearl Initiative, which really embraces corporate governance as a business, strength, finds the value creation in adopting better measures of transparency, accountability, and more broadly speaking, corporate governance. And that, initiative brought on partners from across the region and worked on a number of different programs. 5 or 6 years into that journey, we had a number of requests from family offices who were in the process of establishing foundations, looking to see if we could adapt some of the outputs and courses and learnings and research to what they were doing in the foundation space. So we looked into whether something like this would be appreciated across the board, and there was overwhelming interest. So we then established this governance and philanthropy program at the time, and still actually in partnership with the Gates Foundation, to help again identify opportunities to build better institutions, whether they're foundations, charities, or even just better principles for giving within the philanthropic sector. And that, in a relatively short space of time, became one of, if not the most popular program. There was some skepticism originally to say, look, culturally, we're not ready for this because the practices of giving were much more sort of quiet, if you will. And some would say that that was informed by our religious scriptures. Some would say that that's just informed by practice over time. I mentioned some of the socio-political challenges as well. So people didn't feel that it was right for them to stick their head above the parapet when they were giving away pools of money, so they'd rather do that much more quietly. But what we noticed is with the generational shift, those habits started to change. And there are, different reasons why. Perhaps, the next generation relying a lot more on social media to share pretty much everything they're doing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner means that they become more comfortable sharing perhaps what they're doing with their giving practices. But that certainly shifted. And then you add to that the advent of technology. And then you have this, this wave of new thinking that's coming into the practice of philanthropy. And that fed into the program. So we found the champions of, whereas with the other programs that the Pearl Initiative was pursuing, you had sort of CEOs and patriarchs and matriarchs of businesses who were championing, on behalf of their companies, those programs. With the philanthropy program, it was mainly the next generation that came on, that saw the value in this and wanted to lead in this space. So I wonder whether this would have been possible, 10 years ago. Right. So I really do think we're at the right time to be talking about this and really moving the needle on it, but also the right place. And I think the UAE really uniquely captures the, again, right time, the right place, and with the right communities and networks. I mean, we've seen many recent examples, not least COP and Expo and others, where the UAE can become a global convener, bringing people together around difficult issues, and at the end of that process, leaving with, at least in the example with COP, with outcomes that simply would not have been possible if we were just talking bilaterally. So the multilateral process, UAE has demonstrated, is not dead and is possible with the right conducive environment for those conversations and action-oriented outcomes.
So, good point on COP, because it's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you were quite involved in COP as a special representative, and you focused on the business and philanthropy arm. And so this idea of COP being not just, a multilateral government endeavor, hugely important. In the end, that's what you need the deal to get through, but also the role of business and thinking about philanthropy. And you also, in your opening remarks, were referencing climate and how important it is, be it adaptation, mitigation, all action is going to require a whole of society effort. So how do you see that nexus, this climate action and philanthropy, but also the private sector, now that we are post-COP28, even though the UAE continues to hold the presidency, of course?
No, indeed. We're very much still in the thick of it, as they say, but just over, 4 months now since the historic UAE consensus outcome from COP28. Look, as you know fine well, Mina, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber went on a year-long consultation process to really understand where the gaps are, where the needs are, where the frustrations are, where the opportunities are. And it was pretty clear early on in that consultation process that one key missing aspect was the authentic engagement of business networks and philanthropy, or the private sector more broadly, in the climate and nature action agenda. So how does one go about addressing that? Now, Dr. Sultan said right up front that the only way we're going to move the needle properly, especially in an era where there's so much mistrust and distrust and discord, is to ensure that this is going to be the most inclusive COP ever. adopting a whole of society approach to addressing climate change. Now that sounds like a nice sort of warm fuzzy tagline, but he meant it, and in fact he did it. So I worked alongside him to help to bring the business and philanthropy community on board. We did that by creating an engagement platform called the Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum that happened alongside the Leaders Summit. So we were not saying that this is business people talking to business people or philanthropists talking to philanthropists, that everybody had to be in the same room, ideally on the same stage, not necessarily all at the same time, but certainly in the same convening space, such that we could help to create and generate that multiplier effect. So we managed to attract close to 1,500 CEOs of businesses across 90 countries or so. Philanthropy, interestingly, when we were coming up with the terminology for this forum, the UN was quite keen on just using UN speak, private sector, and I said, look, that's fine, but I think it's important we specify that this is open to, and we expect the active engagement of philanthropy. So let's call it business and philanthropy. There was a lot of back and forth. Anyway, we won. And it was called Business and Philanthropy, and it made a difference, because just having philanthropy in the name, we had over 400 foundation heads from 60 countries.
Who found a space for themselves.
Who found a space for themselves.
They could belong there, yeah.
And found opportunities to engage cross-sectorally, and it made a huge difference. So just those few days of the forum itself managed to, or saw, an additional $8 billion. This is over and above the $62 billion raised over the whole COP process, but additional $8 billion, a large portion of which came from philanthropies. But we found, I think it was over 20 new partnerships between business and philanthropy that emerged just by having the same people in the same room, obviously talking about a really pressing issue like climate. But had it not been for that engagement platform, I don't think that would have happened, or at least not in the same way. So, but the question is going forward, right? If we're going to have, this consistency in delivery and action, not just from one convening to the next, from one year to the other, but throughout the year, what does that engagement platform look like? And this is what we've been working on. It has to involve the UN. And it has to involve, as you know, the COP28 presidency already established this troika with the Azerbaijan presidency, the COP29 presidency, and the Brazil presidency, the COP30 presidency, to make sure that we have consistency in action. But unless we have the private sector properly on board, helping to move from announcements and pledges to action and implementation, we're not really going to see that consistent delivery which is required to move the needle. And just going back to the climate philanthropy issue or opportunity, yes, today climate philanthropy makes up less than 2% or so of global philanthropy, and that hasn't really moved much. But today, I think and again, using, putting more expectations on the next generation, identifying much more with the interconnectivity of these crises. I'm much more optimistic that we're going to see much more strategic investments in philanthropic climate investments in the coming years, which will generate and help to generate that multiplier effect. And we're already seeing examples of that, some of which is happening again in Africa and Asia, from philanthropic capital dispersed within Africa and Asia, not your typical funding or granting coming north to south. And I just think that trend is going to continue, and it won't be linear. It'll be exponential.
You've answered my next question, which was, what do you see as future trends? So in a way, you've answered that, but is there anything further you wanted to add, future trends that you see in philanthropy?
Yeah, I think it's that confluence of generational transition, wealth transfer, the technological embrace. I mean, just take technology. Technology itself has allowed for this so-called democratization, if you will, for lack of a better word, of philanthropy, helping to move philanthropy from a one-to-many model, where the very rich individual would give to multiple different causes, whereas today it's you have the option for the many-to-one model as well, where you can potentially tap into an infinite number of micro donors to help to support with significant amount of aggregate pooled capital a single cause or project, and technology has unlocked that. And then you add to that a lot of the deep tech environment, including big data and AI and all the other big, scary and wonderful things, that's just going to accelerate that trend. So that trend is unstoppable, which is why I think, I certainly feel this sense of urgency. While more capital comes into play, while there is more, I think, rigor in the way in which philanthropy is dispersed, if we don't have the enabling environment in place to capture that passion and that, quantum, we're going to be leaving a lot of impact on the table, as they say. So there really is an urgency to get, our houses in order, quite frankly, with this infrastructure across the world.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time in our session, but I'm going to ask you one final question, and you have to answer it in 2 sentences. What advice would you give to philanthropists today? One piece of advice. I know you have lots, but one.
I mean, other than having fun, don't assume you know the problem that you're trying to fix. Really apply yourself to it. We've seen this issue with trends in social enterprise, this term called heropreneurship, where people went out on these big quests but didn't properly understand the problem that they were going about trying to solve, and in some cases, in some high-profile cases, ended up actually making the problem worse. And the same could apply absolutely in philanthropy. So really, really be disciplined in understanding the problem you're setting out to solve, and have fun.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Please thank our wonderful speaker, Badr Jafar.
Thank you, Mr. Badr Jafar, as the inspiring sessions, and you are very inspired by your dedications to blending business success with meaningful social impact. So we left this session with deeper understanding of how individuals like Mr. Badr Jafar are shaping the future of philanthropy, not just in the UAE, but across the global South. Let's carry forward these discussions and actions towards a more sustainable and equitable world. Before we continue to the next sessions, can I just ask everybody to just stand up, please? Yeah, and please to fill up the room in front of you. And yeah, the first row, there's a nice coach, so you can just move up front, and we'll be having a more spectacular sessions, have a very inspiring leaders for the next session. So please carry forward. Very helpful to see that there's a lot of discussions happening today in our conference. Great. So yeah, I think, please, for you that just come to fill up the room in front. We have a very nice coach in front of you, and please, if you could sit in front of me, and because we do have very great sessions after this. All right. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it very much. Can I ask people in the back seat just to fill up the room in front of us? Thank you. Can I ask everybody to also fill up the first row in the rooms? You can grab your coffee outside and just go back to here. Just enjoy your coffee while witnessing the sessions that we will have up next. So yeah, okay. So the next sessions is the second of inspired sessions today, which showcase of inspiring Asian social impact leaders who are innovating and shaping the future for addressing today's most critical issues. Up next, we'll be having Meera Shenoy, the author of You Can Be Smarter and Wiser, a Bloomsbury publications, which is a bestseller in third editions, which captures inspirational stories of entrepreneurs with disabilities and company leaders who integrate disability into their business. Now, she is founding and leading the Youth for Jobs Foundation's pioneer in market-linked skill training for rural, tribal, and disabled youth, and linking them to sustain livelihoods at scale. Her mission is to create an inclusive and equitable society for young people with disabilities. Now, before I invite Meera, we have a short video to play for stuff. Yeah, thank you.
%80 of the world's disabled live in developing countries. India has 17 million of them, mostly in the villages. Barely 0.5% are in jobs. ILO states this low labor market participation results in a 5 to 7% GDP loss. These are the disadvantaged of the disadvantaged. How do we break this vicious cycle of poverty? We work with young persons with disabilities from poor families and companies to get them to hire them not out of sympathy but because it makes business sense. Our replicable model is step 1, advocacy. We have reached 12.1 million households. Step 2, demonstration. We have actually skilled and placed in jobs. This year, 10 youth every single day.
And we have found them to be kind of more honest and productive than the normal people actually. On a scale of 1 to 5, I would rate them anything above 4 actually.
Step 3, measurement. Companies found low attrition, higher productivity. Amazon alone hired 4,000 speech and hearing impaired alumni. We use technology for transparency. Digital literacy is part of all our trainings. Swarajability is South Asia's first AI-triggered, fully accessible job platform for the disabled. Sure, we help achieve SDG goals, but what keeps me and my team going is the fact that a job is not just a job for Kiran, Lulu, Gopal, different disabilities, different jobs, different places.
Friends shunned me, thinking disability is a disease. Today I earn and actually help others with my savings.
Every mother worries about her disabled child, as their brothers and sisters do not want to be burdened with them. We bless Youth for Jobs for letting us die in peace.
Let us together, using technology for transforming lives, leave behind an inclusive India, an inclusive Asia, an inclusive world.
Please join me to welcome and give round of applause to Meera Shenoy, founder and CEO, Youth for Jobs Foundation.
Thank you. Good evening, and it's so good to be here at the AVPN Global Conference 2024. I used to work in the corporate world like many of you, then moved to business media and international television. But a day came when every day I would get up and say, hey, this is not enough. It's not enough to capture these stories on print or camera. You need to do something hands-on. And I think what happens is that, it must have happened to many of you, the universe conspires to make this happen. Anyone who does greater good. And that began my 20+ year journey of skilling underprivileged youth and linking them to jobs. First as head of India's first skilling mission, the EGMM, then the World Bank, then going again to the government to support the advisor to the Prime Minister on skilling, funded by the UN. And today, I'm founder Youth of Jobs, which skills youth with disabilities and links them to sustain livelihoods at scale. We describe ourselves as an organization with a heart, which scales evidence-based livelihoods, because that's what the work is. Like any startup, when we began the work, it was incredibly difficult. Where were the youth with livelihoods in the villages? We went there and people would say, oh, Gunga, Anda in Hindi, which means blind, deaf. They're not called by their names. They have no identity, which means their self-esteem is incredibly low. Where are the special educators? Where are the companies to hire? Because most of the companies did not understand disability. Today, many of these things have changed because of ESG, where I think investors, many of them are in the ABPN, actually encourage companies not just to look at the bottom lines, but also to do good. And this is important. This has helped to change the ecosphere slowly. And besides that, we do a whole range of services to support companies like sensitization workshops, accessibility audit, job carving, and a whole range of services. The impact of this is, just to give you an example, in a multinational manufacturing unit, which hired girls with disability for the first time. They had an internal target of 2%, it went up to 5%, and today, yes, it is, can you guess? 10%. We began Project Parivartan, which means transformation, to train rural youth with disabilities who have low education. We gave them 21st century skills like English communication, soft skills, life skills, digital literacy, all skills which they lack in the village to take them to a job. As our company networks grew, and today we work with about 3,000 plus companies, they began asking us for educated youth. So we set up the IT Academy, the Banking and Finance Academy, and the Finishing School. During COVID, our helplines were full of women, young women, asking, saying they too needed money in their pockets, especially in these difficult times. So we set up afternoon classes for them so that they can finish their housework. So this is how we have scaled our work, keeping one eye on the community and one eye on the markets. When we were Asia winners of the MIT's prestigious Future Work Award, and I'd got to the US to receive it, every jury walked up to me and said, a next logical step of ours was to set up a job platform for this work, exclusively for youth with disabilities. And that's exactly what I did. I came back to India, and I set up Swaraj Ability. Swaraj is the Gandhian word for freedom, ability because we leverage the abilities of persons with disabilities. It's a completely accessible AI-triggered job platform for 21 disabilities, and even for those who don't have a smartphone. Companies, NGOs, governments, everyone use this platform. So willy-nilly, very seamlessly, we moved to being from a skilling organization which gave sustained livelihoods to becoming a system changer where everyone in the system and the ecosphere works with us. However, what keeps me on the journey, and many people ask me this question, is the fact that I know for a cert, and there's several studies on our work, which shows that every youth I touch comes out of poverty in a sustained manner. The boy or the girl from the village quite often turns gets 100 times what his non-disabled parent or sibling would have. He saves, he's confident, he dreams for the first time and sends back home. When you're a girl with disability, you have 4 burdens on your shoulder. McKinsey did a pro bono study on our work and found that it reduces these sexual attacks which are done. It gives her a voice in the family, in the community, improves the quality of life, and of course, most of the women are willing to help the others. Our vision is to impact 1 million youth with disabilities in India and developing countries where the geographical conditions are the same. And please remember that 1 million you have to multiply by 10, because that's the kind of effort which goes when you work with youth with disabilities, and they move from being a liability to a family of 5 to then becoming an asset. No one can do this alone. It needs the support of everyone here to work together to make sure that we leave behind an inclusive world. So let me end this by saying the 3 powerful words which I want all of you to reflect and say after me. Together, we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. What a wonderful work and story you have shared. We are very inspired with that. So before we go to the next sessions, please, I would like to really ask you guys to stand up, because this is our last sessions before we go to the conference dinner. So if I may ask for people to just stand up. So we just have a very quick ice breaking. So yeah. So I just want to ask everybody to just turn your right and left and just introduce yourself. Say where you've come from. If you already know each other, say your back. Maybe something that you, yeah. Wonderful. So can I get your attentions back? Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very wonderful. Now, can I ask you guys to please sit again? Thank you. And together, if you can shout out with me, just release the stress that you have, the crowded, the hectic, the overwhelming conference with One Asia, One Future. Let's shout out together. Can we? 1, 2, 3. One Asia, one future. One more time. 1, 2. On my commands in number 3, all right? 1, 2, 3. One Asia. Thank you. So, this will be our last sessions, but as always, last but not least, these sessions will talk about despite the new trends in social investments, philanthropy remains vital for achieving the SDGs, especially in hard-to-reach frontier communities comprised of grassroots, indigenous, and minority populations. While philanthropies have laid the groundwork, the practice itself is evolving to increase collaborations, improve participations, and address power of imbalance. In these discussions, hear from inspiring practitioners who champion these principles and who are leading a movement for addressing complex needs in hard-to-reach places. We will be having a very inspiring and remarkable 4 speakers. I would like to invite the moderators today, Prita Venkatachalam, partner and co-head, Asia and Africa Bridgespan Group, which I would like also to call her as our new board member at FVPN. Also, a warm welcome to the 3 speakers, Vidya Shah, Executive Chairperson of Adult Gift Foundations, which is also our AGM member. Asif Saleh, the Executive Director of BRAC. And Elizabeth Gillis, the CEO of Menzies Foundations. Thank you, and I give over to Prita Venkatachalam.
Thank you. It's nice to have a small, intimate audience. Initially, when we had the prep session, we were told that we're going to be in that big football-sized room of capacity of 600, and that made all of us gulp. But then we were told it's this room, and there are like 50 people, and that felt like more influenceable, to have a good conversation. So thank you for coming in, and I know this is the last session of the day, and the big room is getting prepped for dinner. So we will try and keep this conversation very practical and action-oriented as opposed to just the theory. Maybe to begin with, just so that we can all wake up, and I love quotes for those of you who know me. I'll start with this very influential quote that I remember a lot in the work we do in this sector. It's by Martin Burt, who wrote Who Owns Poverty in 2019. And the quote is as follows. He spoke about the most radical vision for a future-oriented development organization to be one with no agenda, no mission, and no own thematic focus, and to really work around facilitating the change goals of the families and communities that the organization works in. And to me, that was just so powerful because we have many organizations, each with its own siloed vision, its own theory of change, determining programs far away from the communities in head offices, whether it's in India, Washington, D.C., New York, Seattle, London, going to the communities, doing quote-unquote a need assessment, and then expecting the communities to actually follow that agenda. And I really feel like today's panel around frontier communities needs to put the ownership and decision-making and power where it needs to be, which is in these communities. And just to be clear, so that we all have a shared, aligned understanding, what we as panelists agreed to define frontier communities as is looking at the more vulnerable, marginalized populations who historically have been left behind in the development change process, whether it's the government as a key actor, or philanthropy, or indeed the markets, private sector. So we'd like to put a spotlight, and you'll see 3 very varied leaders, change makers here. Thank you for your time here on the panel. And also very different country contexts. So we're talking about, looking at Asia, one Asia, which is the challenge, ranging from Australia to Bangladesh, India, and beyond as we weave into this conversation. To begin with, I'll start with some of the insights that we ourselves as Britspan are learning. We have a multi-year initiative around community-driven change. And we have a group of community of funders, some of who are in this room, like Vedis Foundation and Swadesh, but also others who are not in this room, like Hilton Foundation, H&M Foundation, Target, Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies, who are trying to mainstream the idea of community-driven change. And one of the big insights we are learning is that those funders who really center building both communities' power and assets, which is defined essentially as building the leadership, skills, resources, and the agency of the populations, are the ones that can really create irreversible and more inclusive social change. Whereas those funders who are having a more traditional top-down philanthropic approach might achieve great programmatic results on the log frame, but then those are the same funders who are struggling to quote-unquote exit or even wean down their support in the communities, because those are essentially acting as handouts as opposed to providing a hand up to the communities they're working in. We also realize that a lot of the work traditionally in the last many years has been around treating communities as just recipients or beneficiaries. So for example, this again is an example that's really came to life during the COVID response, where a lot of slums, whether it's in Kenya or Mumbai, were reeling with very high degree of COVID infection and spread. And while there were lockdowns enforced in countries, many funders were supporting giving food aid, treating the communities or the slum dwellers as beneficiaries of it. And of course it was useful because a lot of these people were thrown out of their employment and did not have daily food and water. But when we interviewed these communities, the lack of dignity they felt, and also the lack of hopelessness by having to queue up with plates to get food and water was just deeply depriving them of their sense of feeling pride and ownership of living. So the same development agenda in the future phases of the lockdown when things opened up was set up as community kitchens, where as opposed to having food aid, the same development dollars went into setting up kitchens where the communities actually participated, co-created and owned the whole process of cooking the foods that their communities like. And in fact, a lot of the local transport dwellers, like the three-wheelers who were thrown out of employment during COVID, took the food to some of the hamlets where there were aged people or pregnant women who were unable to walk to the community kitchen to get food. So we can think about what the same money works when you treat communities as a recipient versus actual partners and owners in the change process. And really, that's the paradigm that we are hoping to challenge this group with as we look at frontier communities. On that note, maybe I'll begin with Vidya. And for those of you who know Edelgift Foundation and others who don't, they have been pioneers in setting up something called the Grow Fund, which is all about the grassroots resilience, organization well-being of smaller proximate nonprofits, and shining the light on several which have never gotten funding in the past, some working in the vernacular as well. So Vidya, it'll be great to hear from you how you've actually centered some of these frontier communities and the nonprofits through the Grow Fund and other work.
Thanks, Pritha, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I think a lot about Edelgift and what we do and how we do is really centered in our guiding principles. And one of them is to keep communities and grassroots organizations at the center of our work. The reason I mention that is because our own funding is, sort of diverse. We do have our own pool of money which comes from our parent, which is a financial services company in India called Edelweiss. But we also partner with a number of funders, both from within India as well as overseas. And that partnership enables us to kind of achieve exponential reach and impact and cover many more organizations than we otherwise would. And what happens when you partner with funders is sometimes you get driven by their agenda. And keeping that in mind at all times and being very mindful of the fact and telling yourself again and again that what you exist for are for these community or is for these community or based organizations, for these grassroots leaders and organizations, actually enables you to center your work more appropriately. So this has been kind of our history, the way we've worked. And the Grow Fund, which was our latest initiative, we were a group of about 36 funders from India and abroad who came together. It was designed by Edelgave in collaboration with about 5 key funders out of these 36 to address a particular challenge that emerged in COVID, which was that there was, on the one hand, a lot of money, but most of it was going into COVID-related aid, whether it was food, whether it was medicines, whether it was hospital care. But a lot of grassroots organizations that did a lot of essential work in communities were hugely deprived of funding, and they had to let go of people. And so the idea was that the resilience of our organizations, their sustainability, was called into question in the midst of COVID. And obviously the smaller ones, the mid-sized ones, were the ones which were more vulnerable. And so we set up the Grow Fund. Grow stands for Grassroots Resilience, Ownership and Wellness. And it was a 2-year program. We just finished the last piece of funding in March. It was a 2-year funding, and the funding was only for capacity. We had to work very hard to tell our organizations that they could not use it for program. It was a new dilemma, I think, that many of them had faced. And I think when it comes to frontier communities, what was interesting is because we were also funding, it was a program at scale. We were going to select 100 organizations across India, geographically dispersed as well as programmatically. We were agnostic to program, and we wanted equal representation from the 4 regions of India. The application form was made intentionally very simple, because frontier communities are not designed to fill in applications that are very complex and give you numbers. We also used a vernacular, almost 10 to 12 languages, as well as a huge network of media, as well as local grassroots organizations and partners to spread the word. And one of the main question really was, if they got the grant, what would they do in terms of capacity? So we wanted them to tell us where they wanted to spend the money. And once these 10 were selected, it was a very heart-rending task, because we had to select 100 out of nearly 3,000. And it was so interesting, because once we got the data and they were selected, we actually did a small webinar to explain to them what we saw as capacity, and how, in our experience of over 16 years, where we see capacity as being most deficient or an area of need. And we went back and asked them, in that context of having been part of the webinar, to go back and see if they wanted to change where they wanted to spend. And 60% of the organizations did. So it was very interesting, because when you ask them the question and then you give them a little bit of context or perspective and a nudge, you find remarkable insights that come back. And I think these are ways, asking them the question rather than telling them, and giving them a nudge based on experience and out of pure sort of intention of partnership. You see actually, significant change happening on the ground. So this is particularly in the context of Grow, that we have seen how communities actually react in a way that is most beneficial to them.
Thanks so much, Vidya. I think this also brought to the fore the paradigm of how actually changing the funding approach, even though, as she said, there were 37 funders, it really placed the focus on capacity building, organization development of these organizations that are smaller and often don't get the kind of grant dollars that an English-speaking, a well-writing organization to submit applications to some of the big-ticket funders could otherwise get. Moving on to, I'll go in order, so I'll move on to Asif. And we had a very provocative discussion over lunch about BRAC, as we all know, is one of the most at-scale NGOs globally, not just in the global south, but globally. And I know you're thinking of a different development, alternative, different development model that probably BRAC could share lessons with the world. So just in the context of frontier communities, we'd love to hear from you, Asif, about this alternate paradigm that you're thinking about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pritha. And yeah, I mean, in a sense, if I can have all of your permission, I can be a bit more provocative here, because I think essentially the state of the world, as is, hi Karthik, I see a lot of familiar faces, and the state of the world that we are in right now, with so many different humanitarian crises, inequality at its all-time high. I mean, we cannot just be talking about some of these things and not do anything about it, right? I think what Vidya talked about, what this panel is all about, it's one part of the puzzle. But I think the whole development paradigm, how things are being done in international development, I think that whole thing needs a big disruption as a whole. It needs to be different. The reason being exactly that we have too many crises, too many challenges to waste our resources. So we have to know what is impactful, what is working, and rather than just go by individual anecdotal stories and stuff, right? So I think from that perspective, I think how you define frontier community is true, marginalized community, but I think it's true for any community as a whole as well, that how we design programs, what we decide to do, what in terms of as a project, the long-term sort of aspect of the moving from a project-based mentality to a much more longer-term view, those are so crucial. So I'll just give you maybe one example of how we started our education program, right? So that will kind of illustrate some of these points of doing development differently. One is that, so BRAC started in 1972 as a way to kind of support the refugees from Bangladesh who went to India during our liberation war, and they returned and they were looking for immediate relief. So from very quickly after providing the initial relief, we saw that people look for livelihood opportunities. And that's from that like one relief organization mentality started, we branched into one of the largest development organizations in the world right now with almost 100,000 staff, reaching almost 110 million people in Bangladesh and Asia and Africa. And there was no one big organic plan that this was going to be the case, but this happened through exactly what this panel is all about, talking to the community, listening to the community, designing programs for the community, involving them as part of the solution. So education programs started in a way by discussing with our village organizations, when we were doing microfinance, that they were discussing all of the times what their problems were. So they came to us and said that we can't send our kids to school. We don't want this life that we are leading. We want them to break the ceiling. But the schools are too far away. The children help us for farming during the morning, so I cannot send them to schools. I feel worried about their safety. I don't know what's going on. So they described every single reason why they don't send their kids to school. Very pragmatic, practical challenges. So we decided then we could do the big formal schools, but that's not going to scale very well because there were too many areas around the country which needed schools. So can we come up with a model which addresses all of these problems that they were they were not sending their kids to school for, and at the same time, a model that can scale, and at the same time, a model that will give them better education than the national system as well, with joyful learning and stuff. So we decided that we're going to get some of the best consultants and experts on pedagogy from some of the best educational systems like New Zealand, Finland, and other places. But then how to create the curriculum. But then how gets delivered on the ground was very Bangladeshi, very non-formal, very cost-effective. So this one room, 30 children, one teacher model that was born with 22 schools in Bangladesh in 1986. And then, of course, it went through iteration, but then every single thing that they talked about, the timing was flexible. Because it was a rented property, but how the room was designed, everything was very thoughtful. And then, because it was a very cost-effective solution, but the focus really went on teaching, training the teachers, building a top-class curriculum, but delivering it at a cost-effective way. We could scale up the model dramatically over the years. So what started as 22 schools in 1986, by 2009, we had 64,000 schools in Bangladesh. So 15 million children graduated out of our school system, those who would not have gotten education in the national system. Now, here again, the trick is that the teacher, who was the school teacher, she was basically, would be a housewife, who would be a high school graduate, who would not otherwise get any employment. But then we really invested in her. It's always a woman. And so we really invested in her. So the idea was that even if the BRAC school is not needed, she can become a government school teacher because the capacity stays with the community. And some of the cases where we closed our schools, they ran their own schools themselves. They became government teachers by giving the entrance exam. So this is, I think, the power of the community. So when the needs are coming from them, the design is very much built around them, because a lot of the cases, the community actually gave their room for free to us. And that's why, with the very limited resources, we could do 64,000 schools. And essentially, and there are many, many examples like that. I know, starting with the healthcare, Shastro Shebika model, the work that we were doing in graduation. And this is, again, having this long-term view, having community becoming very central to everything, that whether BRAC is there or not doesn't matter, the capacity and the ownership. They really, if we try to close a school, they're like, no way you can close it. We want this school to run, so we will run it ourselves. So, and every time I go to the field, one of the big demands, because now we have closed down a lot of our schools because we now have public school system, but they complain about the quality. So they still come to us and say, can you open? But we don't. So again, I just wanted to make that point by making that example, because I think essentially now that we are looking at different sets of challenges, oftentimes as you said, the design comes from abroad. There is this power dynamics that we can go talk about a bit more, but I think fundamentally looking at things, if you look at it from a short, our founder used to say, you love quotes, so I say that small is beautiful, but large is necessary, and particularly for One Asia, right? So essentially, you can have a very beautiful model, but which is very impractical when you think about doing it at scale. So that's why I think, I feel like when I talk about disruption, I talk about disruption not just in financing, but in how designs are done, how things are evaluated, how we decide to go for scale, how we work with government. All of these things have to be looked at, because ultimately you're not just providing a Band-Aid solution, but you're actually trying to make the system work for the poor, make the government work the poor in some ways, right? Thank you.
No, I think that's very, very powerfully said, because, the question really is, who is the expert, right? Is it the communities themselves, or is it some expert coming in from the outside to suggest what the solution is? And I think the example you gave, particularly the fact that the communities provided the teachers, and even after the school closed, there was a lot of appetite to continue education, just shows that very vividly. One thing I would like to ask you before I move to Liz is, you mentioned proving the model at a small scale, but also rapidly scaling up. What is that secret sauce that BRAC has, managed to crack consistently, right? Like you gave the example of education, but you can take microfinance, you can take health, you can take now climate more recently, or even nutrition earlier. because there's a lot of great community models, and there's this concept of scaling in. So place-based, make sure there's at scale prosperity in the community. But what makes BRAC unique to be able to then also scale outwards to the large that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think essentially, first thing is the ambition is required. You need to have that dream that this needs to be scaled as far as possible, either directly through you or through government or through other means. I think that then the entrepreneurial approach, because oftentimes it's, for a lot of organizations, I think it's the fear that comes in. We can't take this on because it's too risky. We're gonna fail. So I think what we have been able to do over the years is we have now built a system which is very strong in foundation to support scaling of programs in a big way. So that's for sure. So beyond the ambition, the plan, and then the design, like when we are doing the piloting, so we have a 3-step approach. Like, of course, you start with the pilot or proof of concept, but then you test the model for scale. So you look at the elements of what are the 80% impact coming from the 20% of effort, or the 20% design element, which is giving you the maximum bang for buck. So you keep that 20% and ensure that they kind of cut all the fats. What are the non-essential part? So sometimes to reduce the cost, sometimes to make it basically essentially to do more with less. And then rigorous going back at it by whether it's through researchers, asking that question, that is it working? Why is it not working? Before you are confident that now, and I think that bit requires a lot of honesty amongst us, because the one thing that needs disruption is that because we are all about success stories, and we talk about these in all the forums as well, right? So that all the pilots are successful. How is that even possible, right? So essentially, I think that's the other element, that honesty, and as of course, I think having our own financial sustainability has been able to give that, being able to take those risks, give us that independence, and also have that confidence to negotiate with the donors as well, that this needs to change. So sometimes the way we have designed our proposal and gave it to the donors, and how the project ended was very, very different. And the donors were okay with that because we continuously had that conversation.
No, thanks. I think we'll come back to you on that, because I think what's often forgotten is that donors need nonprofits as much as nonprofits need donors. But sadly, the power imbalance works in the other direction. Liz, you sit in a very unique vantage point, because I know your foundation does phenomenal work with indigenous populations, youth, leadership development, but equally you're also globally looking at how do you drive field building approaches, systems change, and often in the development discourse, these two don't necessarily go together, because, like, to borrow Asif's point, small is beautiful. So when everybody thinks working with indigenous communities is at the small scale, supporting them at that place, but how do you actually pull up as a foundation then to integrate those approaches with more systemic change and field building approaches? Would love to hear from your experience.
Thank you so much. So the Menzies Foundation is a small foundation with very limited resources. And our challenge was, my chair's sitting in the audience, my promise to my chair and to the board was that we would build a catalytic platform that addressed leadership challenges at scale. And the challenge for the foundation was, how could we do that? We didn't have millions of dollars to fund 100 organisations. We had to be very, very thoughtful about the sort of model or engine that we would build, so that we had a line of sight from the challenge we wanted to address, and ultimately something that connected systemically to address that challenge. It's a conundrum. Not many resources. What sort of engine might do it? And the sorts of areas and the sorts of ways that we approached that problem was to build, and our engine at the Menzies Foundation is a challenge-led innovation play, where we seek to do due diligence on a system to uncover a lever or a challenge in the system that the system wants to address, And we then build an innovation challenge approach to how we address that challenge. And our hypothesis is that new knowledge that answers the system question drives action in the system. So if you can find the question that is a challenge in the system and you can answer it in a way that it meets multiple perspectives, the system will change. And now the question is, how do you find new knowledge? How do you discern a new answer? And the Menzies Foundation takes a system entrepreneurial lens to how we think about systems change. We are entrepreneurs in systems change. And we very specifically have a model where we find the system question that the system's hot to answer because people think it will solve a problem for them. And we build multiple expertise, multi-silo expertise incubators to address that challenge. And we never, ever do that without putting people with lived experience at the centre of that incubation process. So we find a group of people with lived experience, either through we create programs of engagement for them, leadership programs, or all sorts of opportunities. We sit them at the centre as a key pillar for co-design, and then we build whatever expertise we need, consultants, universities, experts, practitioners, not-for-profits. We build containers for all those people to coalesce, working with the people with lived experience to agree, develop a common agenda about how to address the systems challenge, to, on the basis of that, iterate and develop an intervention, to test the intervention in the system, and then all to come back together and sense make and review, fail, succeed, pivot, adapt, and start that cycle again. And what's been absolutely fascinating, and I can illustrate just with a couple of examples, what's been absolutely fascinating is that expertise without lived experience is a hollow thing. The people that we work with, the communities or the challenges we address, they don't want to be told what to do. They don't want systems imposed on them. But when we take power off the table and we build containers and platforms for deep relational trust-based engagement that's based on inquiry, that has a tolerance for the time it takes to build trusted relationships to explore, that expects failure, because that's our best friend, and that has a long time horizon around what the solution looks like, it is quite phenomenal what can be achieved without necessarily vast sums of money. And if we do it well, which the Menzies Foundation is now a case in point, others crowd in behind us because they see the merit and the value in what we're uncovering. So I work with Indigenous people, for example, by way of illustration. I sat in 2019, my first AVPN in Singapore, and I heard extraordinary stories about entrepreneurship and supporting women and that sort of gender lens. I heard from Rockefeller, I heard from Gates, I heard story after story after story about the power and imperative of supporting women entrepreneurs in community. And I sat there and I thought, this is an extraordinary program in this part of the world. We have Indigenous Australians, women in Indigenous Australians, dealing with the same type of trauma, poverty, and deficit type mentality, and yet no one's building a pipeline for how those women entrepreneurs can benefit from the same sort of support that Rockefeller and others have given to women in India or Uganda or in a myriad other places. So I came back to Australia and I said, okay, how am I going to find the right partnership group to build a container to explore what we might do in terms of how we might build an entrepreneurial pipeline of Indigenous women in rural and remote Australia? I went to unlikely players. The idea of multi-silos is you don't get anybody who thinks the same and you create enough cognitive never worked with Indigenous women in Australia, but had a track record in Asia and the Pacific in supporting female gendered entrepreneurship platforms. I went to the Kimberley in the middle of the desert, and I found an extraordinary group of Indigenous women deeply committed to changing the trajectory of women in their communities and wanting to work in this space. I went to universities and found people with deep knowledge sets about Indigenous entrepreneurship, multiple perspectives. And what we did is we built over the last 5 years an amazing platform deeply based on the women, their views, aspirations, but working in the space between an articulation of their hopes and dreams for the future and their sense of what they want that to look like, and surrounded by the expertise that could bring new ways of thinking and insights into the work. And I can tell you it's been the most extraordinary journey, because people have said to me there is so much support for entrepreneurship in rural and remote Australia. But what the lessons we've learned is that the system that currently exists to support entrepreneurship in no way meets the needs of the 150 or 200 women in rural and remote Australia as Indigenous women seeking to build businesses. Because the truth is, when they tell their story, it's not about profitability or growing revenue or businesses that generate sufficient return to encourage investment. It's about relationships in their community. It's about a virtual economy where they want to generate businesses for the impact it has on their families, the community, and the planet. It's about a whole range of completely different metrics that we would never have uncovered if we just facilitated more entrepreneurship rather than building a platform deeply informed by these women and their aspiration. And what's emerged from it is business is actually only a proxy for leadership. Our women who work in this space, they might do 2 days of their business, 2 days of family care, a week of something in the community, and come back to the market on a Saturday. But the extraordinary impact that has on the flourishing communities and the essential infrastructure that provides to those communities so far exceeds the sorts of metrics like profitability and revenue generation, and completely changes the trajectory of the capability that we're trying to build. We're no longer just focused on business smarts and financial smarts, which the whole entrepreneur ecosystem up in rural and remote Australia is focused on. We're focused on how do we surface the leadership capability, aspirations and confidence for those women to step up into the roles where business is just one aspect of that that allows them to have the agency and autonomy to be game changers in their communities. So I just can't emphasise enough the absolute imperative, how we think about building deep collaborations and relationships, the sorts of engines we use to do that, how we think about uncovering innovation as opposed to how much we fund and how many projects we fund, is a fundamental shift that I think underpins a lot of what others have mentioned on this panel, that is game-changing, I think, in terms of addressing challenges in the developing world, but also more generally.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said, because the sad thing about our sector is that, like you said, we're actually measuring proxy indicators as opposed to the real indicators. And even as Britspan, when we looked at about 120 such organizations across Asia and Africa, what surfaced is that funders really need to add to their results, quote unquote, results definition, building of the community strength, capabilities, leadership, and agency, which is really the enduring factor. And if that falls in place, better health, better education, better livelihoods follow. But sadly, today we are just looking at bean counting, how many programs are designed, how many children are reached, and the reach game is actually defeating the purpose of helping the communities and being really at the center of communities. So I think Liz's point is actually adding to what Asif and Vidya said about, are we really going to be challenging the mindset when we look at how we work with frontier communities, whether it's the capacity building aspect, working with them at the center, right from vernacular, the long-term mindset, choosing people from within the community so that it's sustainable, and then most importantly, changing the paradigm of what is impact and results. And I think, there's really the crux to start this work in a very different way from what we're doing so far. One area, and I know I'm looking at the clock here, we have about 20 minutes, so maybe another 5 minutes, and then would love to open it up for questions. So maybe in a very quick round robin, like today there's a lot of discussion about what should be the unique role of philanthropy. And related to that, how can you actually unlock more philanthropy for communities? So, Vidya, you'd mentioned, y'all are in a lot of collaboratives, you work with other funders, but also work with communities. So what do you really think, or what do you wake up every morning to say should be your role as a philanthropic foundation to advance vis-a-vis, let's say, what government could do or markets could do?
It's a tough one, but also a simple one. I would just trust our organizations to do what is best for the communities that they serve in. Just leave them alone. Left to me and my team wouldn't like it. It actually, did what it was meant to do, because I have found that every time I go into communities, I just get a good sense of what's going on, report or no report. Interestingly, I also feel, and maybe I sort of left that bit out, which is somewhere knows at the back of my head, is a lot of our organizations that we fund also need support in figuring out how to actually listen to their communities. So sometimes when I go in and I meet, the participants in any of our work, I feel I'm getting a sanitized view, because they either don't want me to listen or they themselves have figured out what's going on. And I think removing those barriers is actually very important. And I'd like to give a small example, if I may. Some years ago, we funded this, we continue to support this brilliant organization called CORO, which builds women's grassroots leadership of women. And one of the programs we supported was a program focused on single women. And the part of the work was actually to get women from those communities to do a small survey to figure out how many women are single. This was a particular region of Maharashtra which had seen extreme deprivation, and there were certain causes for which there were districts in which there were a lot of single women, and there were certain situations that these women would go through. And when these women went out doing the survey, they had been given a pre-printed survey form, which this organization had put together in all kindness and honesty. But it had 4 categories. It had unmarried, it had separated, it had abandoned, and divorced. Sorry, it had widowed, separated, divorced, and then widowed. And these women must be thinking, this has been given to us, but is this really right? And they actually went around and figured that they needed a 5th category. And the 5th category was, I abandoned my husband. So it was such an interesting insight for me. And it was these women from the community who came to this organization and said, if it's okay, we need to change this form. This form is not serving us because we're not getting a true idea of what's going on in this community. And that there is a situation where women are thinking for themselves. So I think, as philanthropists, sometimes we have to just let our organizations be. We have to trust them, and we have to trust them to also, sometimes be like us, or hopefully be like what we need to be, which is trust the communities that you work with. They know what is good for them. It's amazing the things that you see again and again when you do this.
Yeah, thanks, Vidya. I think that's really powerful. The survey example really brings it to life. Maybe the same question to you, Liz.
Once again, I think about sitting in the desert with Natasha Short and the Magdana makers, Magdana's Jara for Tomorrow Makers, which is what the women call our business club. And what they say, which I take very deeply to heart, and it certainly has an impact on the way that we think about your question. The one thing I would do is, the grants are never going to solve problems at scale. So every grant that the Menzies Foundation makes looks to, our North Star is what capital or blended capital model or new capital approaches can we unlock to address this challenge at scale and make it sustainable. My women say to me without any shirking, we don't want grants, we don't want government support, we want agency and autonomy We see wealth creation as a platform that allows us to reimagine how we are in the world for a strength-based approach as opposed to a deficit-based approach. So in thinking about that, you know, the Menzies Foundation could go on funding them for the next 10 years, but that's not going to solve the problem. And so my one request and my, I think, biggest opportunity is how does philanthropy build the space in between how our grants act in service of unlocking capital and particularly blended capital models at scale? How does philanthropy position itself to use technology and the scalable platforms it offers to build solutions where even affordable market products can achieve impact in ways that grants never can? My promise to, and anybody in the audience who wants to join me in that promise, if I'm allowed to make my pitch, please do. My promise to the Indigenous women that the Menzies Foundation works with is that we're going to build a different type of blended capital model that monetarises flourishing communities and builds a sustainable funding source to continue to perpetuate the fabric of the business club that's the platform from which our women can take forward leadership. We want to build at least a regional, if not a global, Indigenous women's leadership movement platform that, as I said, reimagines how to monetize flourishing communities and brings the best investment and impact investment thinking we can to that picture. Now, our women can't do that alone, but as philanthropists, we can build and construct the types of relationships, conversations, expertise and ambition that leverages our women into the heart of that conversation. So my answer to your question is it's absolutely imperative that we see relationship between grants, which are never going to solve the problems at scale, and capital and the investment community, which can unlock sustainable funding models to drive change and impact.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And clearly what she spoke about was not just capital, but the underlying leadership, business, the multifaceted approach to unlock that blended finance. On that note, and we just have about a minute before we open it up for questions, you did mention the word that you have your own financial sustainability model that gives you the power to, you know, influence donors and work on the model that you desire. So if you could just elucidate that a little bit, you know, BRAC then and even BRAC now. Maybe a minute.
Yeah, quickly. I mean, essentially, I think, yeah, that's very important. I think more and more implementing organizations need to also figure out in terms of how they can also have this financial sustainability. Because, so essentially, it's not that, you know, you need to start a new business, but essentially also looking at problems in a very different way. You know, some of our social enterprises were created out of solving the problem of generating livelihood. How do you create new market opportunities for milk producers who bought so many cows in the village that the milk prices had gone down? So you created that entire chain to connect them to the urban market to set up a BRAC dairy. But then you do it well so that you compete with the private sector, but then that becomes a surplus generator and actually solves another problem as well. But just to kind of I want to touch on that point of the philanthropy's role is becoming very, very important because every country is becoming also very inward-looking. And I think as a result, philanthropy's role needs to be, I mean, philanthropists need to talk to each other more. I mean, just like the catalytic funder needs to talk to another funder who does support scale, so that what the catalytic work that is happening with the funding of one can be scaled up with the others. That's number one. That the other thing is also, just like you do in private sector, like when you invest in a startup, you invest looking at the entrepreneur and their business model. We just look at the proposals often, but we don't look at the social entrepreneur so much, right? So I think, in a sense, the best grant that BRAC got has been, of course, the first grant that we got, but also recently we got a grant from Mackenzie Scott, I mean, who basically was like amazing. I mean, it's just a grant that was given, which was like no compliance. You just basically, we have looked at your strategy, we have looked at your institutional strength. You decide how you want to use it. Whether you want to do it an endowment or not, it's totally up to you. So the kind of responsibility comes down to the implementing organization to deliver. So moving away from this compliance focus to really the model and the institution and the entrepreneur is going to be very, very important. Thanks.
Thank you. And Asif didn't mention about Arong, but if any of you get a chance to go to Dhaka, Bangladesh, do check out Brack's Arong, the retail enterprise model. That's a hidden secret on their sustainability, but I won't share more. I can think of n number of questions, but I can see about 8+ minutes on the clock, so maybe a few hands might want to go up. Yeah, I love this small but engaged group. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for a wonderful panel. I just have a basic question about the title, which is how do we define frontier communities? One way of thinking about it is by nationality. We talk about North, South, and I was just in the World Bank spring meetings, that they talk about how climate finance needs to go from less from middle income, more to low income. That's how also I know Asif 12 years ago, as an Indian fund manager, Avishkar was trying to make investments in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and other countries. But then, as you yourself said, it's also within a country, it's also within a nationality, right? And there's so many examples of that. Mira ma'am just spoke about the disabled, or Ganesh was sitting next to her with relatively on urban poverty, or let's say investing in the Himalayan regions, and so on. So what really constitutes the frontier aspect? Is it economic poverty? Is it some other aspect of vulnerability? Some people say it's the relative lack of capital that that segment receives. And this is particularly important to define because we're trying to convince people for these blended capital models to have an extra level of concessionality for these so-called more vulnerable segments. So how, just very basic, simple question, how do we define frontier communities?
Got it. Maybe Ganesh, do you want to also pose your question and then we can take both?
Thank you. Sorry. A lovely panel. Thank you so much. And specific question to Vidya, because we also try and do a lot of pooled philanthropy, both as individuals and organizations. And I run, of course, Lighthouse Communities. But you mentioned GROW, which seems to be a fantastic example. But how do you resolve the different outcome expectations and motivations of the different partners, especially in a large consortium?
Maybe to begin with the definition, I mean, of course, when we did the prep call, we figured we could do an entire hour on just definition of frontier. So in some ways, we kind of skirted that. But since we're back to where we started, Asif, do you want to pick that up? I know you referred to it in your answer.
Yeah, I think absolutely agree that people who needs the most vulnerable, those should be defined as frontier community. But essentially, I think those should be getting the support more from an equity perspective, for sure, right? But essentially, as I was saying, that we also see in Bangladesh, for example, in some parts of Africa as well, particularly as countries are moving up the prosperity curve in many ways, inequality is increasing. But different segments have different types of challenges, which requires a social solution. So in other words, private sector cannot solve that problem. Government cannot solve that problem. So there is a big role for social enterprises to come in. So again, like just in our financial inclusion model, you have defined ultra poor, people who are like half the, so even below the extreme poor defined by World Bank. They get the biggest chunk of support, very strong hand-holding that is required, most marginalized. But then it doesn't mean that the people in the upper community, they have different challenges as well, which the government or the private sector is not being able, whether it's access, whether it's the quality of services and other things. So there is a role for different types of communities, but absolutely, I think, I don't know if I could answer that.
No, I think that partly answered. And you refer to blended finance, so maybe Liz, if you want.
So frontier for communities are the communities experiencing the challenge. Or, often it's a proxy for the impoverished, the whatever. But, an example, for instance, with us, we're doing a small piece of work that is, I just can't wait for it to start, with disengaged young people from school and people, the most influential people setting government policy, the sort of think tank linked to government. That includes the professor who's just been on the Australian National Review. And the small piece of work the Foundation's doing is we're funding students, the most disengaged students from school, the kids in jail, the kids who just cannot engage with school. We're funding them to articulate their experience of disengagement in the school system, and the professors, the ones with who understand or who are very tightly bound to the system, developing a piece of work suggesting their solutions, and we're going to compare the system way the system thinks about solutions compared to the young people's articulation of their experience in the system. And we're going to look at the space in between. Now, those young, disengaged, marginalised kids, they're the frontier community for us in that sense. It's the people with lived experience who are subject to whatever the tragedy or the problem or the issue they're facing, and it's finding ways to unlock their potential to be instrumental in their own solution. So, to be honest, I'm not sure the definitions are that important. I think it's much more around how do we unlock the knowledge, opportunity, ambition for those people to feel that they can be instrumental in solutions that directly relate to their lives and their journeys. And I think there are very interesting ways that philanthropy can play that space in building out those spaces to reposition those living with lived experience at the heart of whatever innovation looks like, and how then we think about what happens next. So I don't know if that's useful, but I can't, these professors say to me, it's absolutely hysterical, they say to me, we're terrified. And I say, why are you terrified? Because you've got all the might of this national review and a million policies and millions of dollars, and I've got 300 kids who are totally alienated from the system, who are going to tell you exactly why what you're doing is not working. And I think that space in between is a powerhouse of opportunity to reimagine. And do you know how much that grant's costing me? I've got 4 foundations funding it. God help me. That's costing me $150,000 to do that. And I can tell you the answer to the question over here. It's not about what those 4 funders want. It's about what the system question is. It's about actually what the kids' question is, about what they need to do to engage to school. And every time they send me 15 templates with 15 questions I've got to answer, I come back to them and I say, it's not your questions I'm interested in. The kids are going to tell us what the question is, and that's what we're going to focus on. So I just think it's a different shift, it's a different orientation, it's a different way of thinking about what philanthropy can do.
But it is a real challenge, though, what Ganesh asked about, that we now deal with a lot of high net worth individuals. They are quite whimsical, and it's oftentimes, it is difficult to
You have to shame them. You have to shame them.
Yeah, I think a couple of things from my experience. One is really pay attention to the design. And like Liz said, you're listening to community, so take a lot of time in the design. Please don't go and launch funds and announce funds and say what you're going to do before you're very, very clear about what you're doing. And in what you're doing, you have to have the voices of the people that your potential grantees, they need to have voices. So we use their voices, their opinion, their views, because we have over almost 300 grantees we've had over time, and we know who to go to and ask. Design is super important. Second is, please don't get funders in your collaborative if you don't like them. If you don't like working with them, if you don't agree with their value system, if they don't know what you're up to, if they don't trust you, don't work with them. It's okay, you can do a smaller fund, but you'll have a happier fund and perhaps a more successful fund.
Great. So I think we're ending where we started. Murugan, do you want to go final question?
I want to stretch the definition of community-driven change. On the one hand, you can do give directly model, which is the ultimate version of community-driven change. You're giving complete autonomy and agency to the individual to do what they want to do. On the other hand, the very definition of democratically elected government is the community-driven change. People elect the government they like to see. Where do you see, in terms of the philanthropy imperative, what are your thoughts on A, the give directly model, and B, government as the role of the government in frontier communities?
Very easy question. Just ensure that panelists are on their feet till the end.
Well, there's a continuum of giving, isn't there? So, the sort of fund that's a capacity building, tied funding that changes the trajectory of an organisation is a hugely valuable contribution. My observation is that philanthropy often defines itself by the number of grants it gives and how many and the size of those grants, and doesn't pay sufficient attention to actually what impact looks like and the way that philanthropy should fund to achieve the impact they're seeking to attain. So if it's capacity building, fund capacity building. Do you know what I mean? If it's small grants to community organisations that give them licence to fund that. But what's most important is don't describe your impact on the basis of the number of grants or how much money you've given away without having ask yourself, what does success look like from your foundation's point of view? How are you going to hold yourself to account for your impact? Which means you have to have clarity around why you fund, how you fund, and what that is. So to answer your question, I don't think it's one or the other, but I do think philanthropy asks a lot of the people, its grantees, and doesn't apply the same level of rigour to their own practice models, or how do they explain what impact they're working towards and fund accordingly in alignment with that model?
And my answer to that question would be that I think those of us who are like very close to the ground know that neither of them works, essentially. The government doesn't work for the poor because theoretically it works, but yeah, in reality it doesn't work. So you have to do something to make the government work for the poor. And on the other hand, the systemic challenges are so high, just giving cash doesn't bring in sustainable changes. It does in certain contexts, like, post-disaster, in COVID, cash transfer worked really well. But our philosophy is that there are a lot of other tools and systemic interventions that are required for change to happen for the future, for the long term. So this is, I think, the fundamental difference between charity and development. Charity is sometimes where people are very tacit recipient of aid. Development is all about where they're active recipients, they're actively part of the change, making things happen. So that's much more powerful.
Thank you. I think that was very helpful. So I think if all of us could leave this room with, I think the term that I heard most often was the shifts that are required, the changes in paradigm, the approach, the normative requirements of what constitutes development, I think is really the crux of the messages that we heard in the last hour or so. I would also encourage more and more nonprofits to actually go forward and challenge your funders to actually think of this paradigm, because some of the times they have the best intentions, but unless the change makers, those closest to the communities, like Vidya said, are understanding where the communities come from and then reflect that in whether it's the application or the discussions, it's very difficult to bring about change. So I think there is a lot of rich messages that came out here, not just for funders, but also those that work close to communities to carry that message back in the work you all do. So thank you so much. I think this has been a really very engaged panel. And I was just joking with them that most often the moderator's job is tough because you ask a question and people are saying, very interesting question, and then they go about saying what they want to. But I think I must say that thank you, because you all have not just answered the questions, but really stretched the thinking of all of us here in the room. So thanks to the audience and thanks to my co-panelists.
Thank you. Please join me to give a round of applause to our speakers. What inspiring sessions and provoking thoughts to end our sessions today. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up these insightful sessions, I'd like to extend warm invitations to all of you to join us for the welcome dinner in the UIA Rich History of Giving at 6:30 today. So, the dinner promises to be a delightful experience filled with great foods, engaging discussion, and chance to unwind after the day of enriching sessions. We look forward to seeing you there and sharing in the spirit of collaborations of impact. I am Rama Hidayat. Thank you so much for your presence today. Have a good evening.